Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Sacred Self-Healing Nspirience training call. This is a series that I want to call Spiritual Living. So what does it mean to be energetically aware, holistically aware, and spiritual to a certain degree? And today I picked a topic that is very timely at the moment, due to outer conditions, but also due to some of the things that we've all gone through here in these last, a year and a half, a couple of years, really, in dealing with overall uncertainty and questions around the future. My name is Jona Bryndis, as you all know, and in this workshop, we'll cover aspects of inner harmony. So why does inner harmony play a big role here? Because when we look at the opposite of harmony, inner disharmony, we'll see that this is where our triggers take place. So our triggers always zoom us out of harmony into a state of disharmony. And what does one need for spiritual, let me call this harmony? What does one need for some kind of holistic harmony? How to deal with triggers, how to deal with lower states better, and what to do if some of our core things are triggered, namely our inner child, karma drama, as I call this. Yeah, triggers. Let me hear from you guys. What are some of the things, just sort of off the bat, that can really trigger you on whatever level you experience something? What can literally sort of nullify all your inner knowing, your intellect, your better understanding, your intentions, your motivations? What do you know about yourself that can literally sort of shift you into a place where you don't even recognize yourself, where you're acting based on some kind of hardwire in you, where something in you takes over? Survival fear, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Survival fear, abandonment, fear of abandonment, yes. What else? You can share in the chat or speak into the microphone.
Hi, Jona.
Hey there.
I'm going to talk about one that is a huge trigger for me, and it's when I get bossed around.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
when I'm
valid.
told to do this or that, and meet timelines and deadlines on being expected to meet those timelines and deadlines, that would require me to utilize my own personal time. I get all kinds of mad. My inner child comes up. My arms fold across my chest, got my nose to the air, and I'm not happy about it. It triggers me big time. Being bossed around, yep.
That's a good one. I mean, there's obviously variations of that, right? There's, anything that kind of feels controlling, that restricts our freedom or that degrades us, right? It degrades something in us when we're being bossed around. Yes, very good. Thank you, Heather. Annette is sharing physical pain. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, the other Annette is tiredness and hunger gets me totally out of balance. Yes, I'm with you there. Me too. That's one of my big triggers. Seems so simple, but not always that easy. Yeah, Becky, physical health, finances, absolutely. Relationships, yes. Oh, okay. You don't have a microphone, Kiss, no problem. Two things trigger you: physical pain, and when I get into the helper mode. Oh, good, yes, okay, helping others. being asked to help others. Does this mode come on when you see somebody struggling or when you're being asked? Is this only when you, or does this both? Okay, all right. Yes, so both. When you see somebody struggling, there's already some kind of impulse in you, like a hardwire, yeah, to immediately jump in or help out, or yes, the jump into helping mode. I'm with you there. I think many of us have that problem with this unhealed healer that I sometimes call this, right? Where we are the defenders of the underdogs. Yeah. Okay, so I think you're in good company here, Kirsten. And Heather's realizing she has a very big list too. Yes. Family dynamics, absolutely. Parents, dealing with parents and siblings, absolutely. In that category, I want to say that dealing with mothers, especially for females, can be even more challenging than just dealing with family dynamics. Yes, it's a good space for that. Authorities, yes, absolutely. It plays a little bit into what Heather said, but it can be more than that. It could be sort of governmental type of things, when we have to fill out forms, or when we have to do our taxes, or when we have to talk to a police officer, or things like that, yeah, or doctors even, depending on what we recognize as an authority, yeah, a boss, or someone who's superior. Yes, oh gosh, and that to me is also a big trigger. Animals not treated in a proper manner. Yes, and add kids to that list. Yeah, so kids and animals, yes, the helpless, the powerless, right? It's really, really hard for many of us, especially if we're energetically sensitive and somewhat on the empathic side, to see other people in that place. Yeah, that's a pretty good list here, guys. So let's see how we can deal with this. Okay, so I have a bunch of slides, and some of them are a bit mental, just for the comprehensiveness of the subject. And you will get the slides and you can work with them yourselves. There are some worksheets at the end that are designed for you to work with yourself. And we're just going to talk through the roadmap of it, but we have to clarify a few terms. Okay, so we're going to jump right into this here and just make sure that we're all on the same understanding here. Spiritual, what does spiritual even mean, relating or affecting to human spirit or soul, as opposed to the material or physical things. Okay, I think we all are okay with that. Now, what we have already learned here within the Sacred Self-Healing course and all the lessons and exercises and daily meditations and so forth, is that we recognize that we exist on different levels. And a big problem for most of us, because we've actually never really been taught that, is to pinpoint where something is taking place. Why do I see this as an energy coach? Why do I see this as a problem for us? Or why does it make it so hard for us sometimes, especially in conjunction with inner and outer triggers? Is because we don't even know where to address things. When we're triggered, our whole entire nervous system reacts. It feels like a hardwire. It feels like we're out of control. We can't control it at that moment. We might have a clear thought about this, or clear feeling about it, but we are unable to stop that reactionary hardwire that is going on. So in order to effectively address any patterns in our lives, but especially when we are triggered, we need to pay attention and learn to or develop a good routine, a good discipline to differentiate. Yeah. So some of these triggers that you mentioned are physical triggers, some of them are emotional triggers, some of them are mental triggers, yeah, some of them are spiritual triggers, and some of them, well, we didn't have that many examples for it, but I'll do some for you. You know, they happen on the energetic level. What can energetic triggers look like? Do you guys have any idea? I mean, you guys are all pretty well trained and have lots of experience already. What are some of the energetic triggers in your life that you can already identify? Okay, feeling someone pushing into your space. Yes, Becky, that's a really good one. How does that feel like? I mean, there's many different situations in which this can occur, right? It can be the actual physical space that somebody's pushing in to, like by overstepping our boundaries somehow, right? You know, these people that are always coming a little too close when you talk with them?
Yeah, or like someone who's talking excessively and kind of like, it's hard for me to like get away from, in a way. It kind of feels like pushing into
also,
like, my space.
Also people who talk very loudly, right?
Yeah, loudly,
loudness, can also feel very pushy.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some places, yeah, like, okay, Heather is bringing up a sort of the man and woman type of boundaries. Yeah, where you feel, you know, something like, it could be an authority thing, okay? It could be where a man is using sort of male intimidation, posturing, okay? And that can feel very pushy for women, especially if they grew up in sort of authoritarian kind of family settings where the father was sort of the ultimate authority. But it can also, from a pure energetic point of view, Heather, men overstepping boundaries, and by the way, this can also be the other way around, so let's not be sexist here. Energetic pushing on this sort of gender level can often plays out as sexual projection. There's this sort of kind of an undertone. It feels kind of icky maybe, or it feels like sort of insinuating something that has to do with sort of unspoken sexual stuff. Yeah, Annette is sharing that some places, and this is not really, this is energetic, you know, is they're just really, just the place itself is really hard to maintain one's own energy, such as a hospital waiting area. I totally agree with you. An ER, like an emergency room, is probably the worst of all of these places where people come in total distress, fear, you know, pain. Yeah, though places where naturally these things occur. You know, funeral homes, like where there's a lot of sadness and a lot of grief. Some areas can be very sort of aggressive energetically, where there's a lot of aggressive sales taking place, like say a marketplace. Yeah, like a you know, where there's a lot of sort of yelling and a lot of offering and a lot of selling. Sometimes these things can also be cultural. So we, and I mean, I'm a Northern European, so if I go to a Middle Eastern bazaar, okay, I find this a very aggressive place because that's just not how I grew up. People yelling at me and do you want this and only $20 and blah blah blah. I find that very pushy. Yes, Kirsten, feeling another person's agenda, like they're attempting to manipulate you. That's a very good one, very good example for an energetic pushing. An energetic trigger. Yes, at least I would agree with you, not being 100% sure what the person's agenda is, right? Sometimes people also leave us in the dark. Yeah, this can be very subtle sometimes. You guys know this in conjunction with people who are specialized on energetic manipulation or emotional manipulation, such as covert narcissism, for example. We will feel this constant sort of there's got to be a different agenda here, but I can't quite grip it. I don't know what that is. It leaves us in a constant state of guessing. Yes, and obviously, Annette, you're right. Some people, it's not necessarily that they are doing something, but in their presence, it's really, really hard. Yeah, do you guys all know what I mean? It's really hard to maintain your own energy. Do you know these kind of people? They can be different because they all trigger something different in us. I can tell you a personal example is when I speak with people who are emotionally all over the place. Do you know what I mean with that? They were just like, whoa, and everything's so big. Again, here that is also a bit cultural for me because, you know, as Northern European, I'm not that, you know, sort of expressive with my big emotions unless it's a very intimate situation. So people who are openly you know, emotional and outgoing and sort of dominating a place with their emotions, I find that very, very exhausting energetically. Yes, but also exactly, Annette, fairs, you know, like sort of large gatherings of people, theme parks, you know, like these big sort of fun spots, yeah, where there's just a lot of noise, a lot of exertion of emotion and energy, just naturally. I have Heather is sharing, I have a hard time with people who are not consistent with their behavior. Yes, me too. It's where they're sort of ambivalent, yeah, or where they're incongruent. Yeah, where this goes hand in hand with this agenda thing. It's like where they say one thing and then they do another thing. It's super, super confusing, right? And it's nothing necessarily that you could prove. It's just like it doesn't feel right. And this is something that we perceive on an energetic level. Yeah, we all perceive on an energetic level, but if we're not trained, we're not able to pinpoint it that clearly. Yeah, that's a really good one, Heather. Incongruence. Yes, and of course, Kirsten, people have most of us, especially energetically sensitives, because that's why we're sensitives, right? We have a hard time with large gatherings. We have a harder time with places where there's a lot of people. Even things such as just high-rise buildings where there's a lot of people present. Not necessarily that we have to hear them, but it is something where there's just a lot of people present. Sorry for the dog barking. Cheryl, you are bringing in a subject here that is very complex and that we have had several workshops for already. So I would like for the details and the more sort of in-depth understanding of what Cheryl means here, gaslighting, I would like to refer to those. You guys just need to go to the forum where the workshop archive is. Gaslighting is where other people, and this can be a group of people or an individual, sort of messes with our sense for reality and keeps us in this constant state. And there's several things that come together here. Yeah, and this is why gaslighting is so complex and also so tricky to identify, because it happens on all these levels simultaneously. Okay, the word gaslighting, as many of you know, is a word that actually comes from a movie in the 40s with Ingrid Bergman, where there was a physical manipulation, and that then led to this main character, this woman, to slowly go crazy. So she started to question herself on all these levels, on her own 5 senses, on her emotions, on her mind, and everything, to a point where this person was in a constant state of cognitive dissonance, a constant state of questioning her own reality, okay, which can have severe consequences for a person, lead a person into craziness. That's why gaslighting also has different degrees, yeah. And when it is sort of to a degree where it really makes us feel like we're going crazy, then it's called crazy making. Yeah. I think you guys all know what that feels like. Okay, so we can establish here that you know, our own reactivity to inner or outer triggers is a very complex thing. It isn't that simple. It is not just words. It is not just deeds. It is not just body language. It can happen on many different levels. Now, I didn't ask this before, but does anybody have an example for spiritual triggers? What can trigger us spiritually? It's interesting. So here, some of you, or most of you, draw a blank. Some of the examples that you guys made actually have to do with the spiritual part of your being. For example, when you see somebody mistreated, when you see somebody experiencing severe injustice, when you see somebody going through something that is unacceptable for you, not just psychologically, but also on a level of belief, you know, like a person shouldn't be going through this. Yeah, sort of where it almost feels like, you know, this person is like abandoned by God or by the universe or whatever, you know, whatever. It's not such a conscious thought process in us, but when that particular situation is actually something that triggers you spiritually, because there's a part in you that says, I'm just modeling this right now, but something along those lines, no human should go through this. Okay, yes, Heather, and I am with you here on that one. That can trigger me as well. My mom likes to tell me that if what I believe isn't proven by science, and that therefore it isn't real, and therefore I need therapy. Yes, yeah, why? How is that spiritually triggering you? I mean, there's a bunch of things. There's a degradation in that too, right? Because she's basically telling you you're crazy and you should go see a shrink. Okay, when that comes from our moms, okay, that doesn't feel good. So there's an emotional component to that as well. But and she's also kind of insinuating that you intellectually maybe somewhere off there. Okay, but what about that is so spiritually triggering?
Well, Jona, that is way too hard for me to try and text it out, so I'm just going to pop back
thank
on.
you. I appreciate that. I like it much better when you share anyway.
And it's also not something that I've tried to put into words before, but I can tell you how it's made me react, or how I chose to react to that. Having that said to me when I was very young and didn't understand much of anything in life yet, the way it developed my sense of searching, I guess, always looking for connection with people who understood what I was talking about. It made me feel very lonely. I was constantly seeking what it is that, why is it that I believe that the trees are talking to me? Why is it that I feel so much love in my heart when I'm standing by the river while it flows? Why is it that I believe so strongly in the sense of love that I feel but can't put my finger on where it's coming from. It's so many things that are really difficult for me to put into words, but along that line. And when I say it sent me into a state of seeking, I'm talking 20 years worth before I finally got to a state of being myself, where I understood that just because I was told that it's fake and not real, if I believe it to be real, then it is. And so I was able to come to a conclusion for myself and settle down with the idea that, no, I'm not crazy. Yes, I have seen things that other people haven't, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm crazy. It just means that she cannot see and feel what I see and feel. Yes.
Thank you, Heather. This was actually very beautifully expressed. Okay, thank you very much. It's very hard to express this. Yes, Kirsten is chiming in. It's hard to put this into words. But you just shared two things with us. You shared, the deep confusion on a very deep level. This is not an intellectual confusion. This is a confusion, if you will, that encompasses your being. When you feel something in the presence of a river or nature or animals, or something that isn't really tangible, that is in the unseen, that is not the sort of fact, 3D based. Okay, many of us here, especially if we are a slightly older generation, have gone through pretty much a lifetime. Our entire journey was dominated by constantly being questioned on this level. And the second part that you shared is how you resolved it, or how you learned to cope with this, namely by seeking like-minded, by going into a community with other people who see this too, who feel this too. Yes, this is the spiritual component is hard for us to prove, because it is something that we cannot necessarily see. Not everybody has energetic vision. You do. So that's even worse. Okay, because psychology tells us that if we see things that aren't there, then that means we are delusional. Okay, so there's another component of this. But also in regards to recognizing the effect that it has on us. So everything that is in the unseen, can still have an effect on us. If you just think yourself 1,000 years back or whatever, when you don't even have to go that far back, when nobody knew anything about germs, bacteria and viruses. Okay, then everything that happened in the world, when they didn't know anything about weather patterns, when they didn't know anything about eclipses, when they didn't know anything about this or that, right? In that world, everything was kind of just spiritual, right? It's a punishment from God, or God made it rain, or so let's not forget that we come from this place, and that we all in our own development here go through this kind of journey where we are learning how to master each of these levels, and where we experience things that we cannot necessarily prove, or we cannot necessarily pinpoint them, but we can talk about what it feels like. And there are some famous examples, such as love, for instance, since you've mentioned this, that humanity's been trying to understand for millennia, and yet we still have a hard time fully understanding it to this day. Okay, so we do not fully understand. We can break it down, and that helps us to understand it a little bit. We can break it down to the physiological components, emotional, the mental, the social, and even the spiritual components. All right, but we're not entirely sure really what defines love, and what is true love, and what is not, and so forth. So this is the energetic component, which is the part that we are sort of all evolving into now. It's a tool that we've always had but never really trained. It allows us to bring some answers Yeah, so people who can feel and pinpoint and see energies, they can inform us about a different dimensional perception here that is very real to those of us who can, and it's also reproducible. So it's sort of semi-scientific to a certain degree, but it has to do with the subjective experience. And that's why science, to this day, which is something that I have been predicting for decades, that the paradigm of science is going to change in the future. Science excludes subjectivity. And that's why it cannot be really defined or explained with our current paradigm of science. Quantum mechanics and so forth change that. So relativity and so forth, without going into this, it changes the way we perceive things and also what is. So in the future, Heather, your mom will be proven wrong. Okay, it's already happening. Just to pick up on this, because this whole entire subject of things can't be proven is something that can pull all of us into a huge big spin. But just because they cannot be proven with this existing scientific paradigm doesn't mean that they're not real. Yeah, we got to remind ourselves of that, just to give you guys a little bit of an antidote here. Now, the other side of that, Annette is pointing out here, is when somebody tries to convince me that everything is kind of religious. Yeah, when somebody tries to convince us that it is God's work and only God's work, and that it's a sort of overly kind of spiritual, that feels almost like sort of blind faith. Yeah, does that kind of match that, Annette? Blind faith, like, especially when somebody pushes in that way and tries to,
yes,
you know what I mean, right? It's like, oh, it's just like everything is God, right? I mean, it is, but
yeah, and you're doomed if you don't believe in my way.
And you better be good or else you get punished. That's always sort of a little extra that comes with this, right? That only those who do believe.
There's a lot of judgment.
Yes, it's extremely judgmental in some religions. Not all, but in some religions it's very judgmental, also very fear-based. And there's also a specialness with this in some religions where it's kind of like the chosen ones. Yeah, or we're going to be the only one who survived the apocalypse or something like that. Yeah, we're just putting this all here on the table, guys. Okay, so we're not judging either. Okay, most of you know this. I'm a very spiritual person, and I do have a very clear, faith in me about God, about the divine. Okay, and I teach that. Okay, but I don't try to convince somebody, that everything is that. Because when you actually begin to see a person, not just yourself, but also others, composed of these different layers, these different dimensions, then you also begin to see that some things are they don't apply to others. Okay, so this has to do with what I said earlier. You have to be able to identify where something is taking place on what level to know how to counteract it or how to address it. Okay, so if somebody is arguing with, let's say you have Heather, in your case, you have energetic vision and you're arguing with someone who doesn't have energetic vision, does that discussion even make sense? No, because that person cannot relate to what you're talking about. If you're speaking a different language and the other person you're talking to does not understand this language, does it make sense to have a debate? No, because you cannot really address another, you cannot relate to another. Yeah, it's the same with spiritual. Does it make sense to fight for your faith? No, it's one of the biggest oxymorons in human history. Yeah, this fighting for God, whatever the God or whoever the God is, makes no sense. Yeah, so we have to recognize that some things don't make sense to address them on that level. They need to be addressed somewhere else. Yeah, Kirsten is sharing, it's hard to put into words because for me, I walk with the divine. So it's all spiritually triggering. So for you, everything is spiritually triggering. And I get this, Kirsten, because for me, similarly to what Heather said, but in a slightly different version, when people don't believe in anything outside of the material, who are designated atheists, okay? Actually, a lot less people are designated atheists than they think they are. So a lot of people say they don't believe in God, but what they really mean is they don't belong to a church, but they don't believe in organized religion. But you know, they usually do believe in some kind of higher power. But when somebody truly doesn't believe in higher power whatsoever, that can trigger me. Yeah, that can trigger me because the unhealed healer gets triggered in me, because for me that is a lost soul. Yeah, someone who cannot, and it doesn't matter what religion or what in what way they form a relationship, but if they have no relationship with the divine, that can trigger me spiritually. Yeah. Yes, Cindy, questioning your intuition. Oh yeah, and new age externalization. Yes, that can trigger me too. What does that mean? Like when you know something and no one believes you or wants you to believe without proof. Yes, that part. Cindy, do you want to share what do you mean with new age externalization? If you don't mind.
Hi there.
Hi.
So, yeah, that's been, I mean, all my life, especially young life, just having energetic sensitivity and having no one, you know, believe that you have these experiences, that you see these things, that you feel these things, especially from your family standpoint, when you know things to be true, but you are actually being gaslighted, like you talked about. The new age thing is super easy to fall into because for me, I had this growing up. I had all of these energetic experiences that back in the day were never talked about. I mean, back then it was an absolute curse. I literally thought I was crazy growing up.
And there's some religions actually who called this, you know, anything sort of magical, anything sort of energetic or whatever as evil.
Yeah.
Just so you know, I mean, there's religions who called a lot of religions. Actually, Catholic Church to a degree does too. Mysticism, yeah, that's the sort of theological department, is a very carefully treated and often censored subject in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about religion in particular is when I was a very young child, like 3 or 4, we used to go to church and I would get this terrible feeling that it was absolutely wrong to be in that situation, which I never understood. It felt, I can't even explain the feeling.
No, when it was at that age, you wouldn't be able to explain the feeling. No.
Yeah, it was just
didn't feel right.
Yeah, didn't feel right. And then later on, when like some more new age stuff started coming in and people started talking about it, I jumped on that bandwagon so quickly. It was like, yes, people are talking about this now. And that's a danger too, because you're going in blindly. So it was learning to discern and trust within. And it's still easy to fall into that, especially now with all of the really deeper stuff and becoming mainstream. You have to be very, very careful.
And the conspiracy theories as well, right? Because some
Oh
of
yeah, I am
trained some of those.
conspiracy.
Yeah. Just so everybody understands here what Cindy is referring to, okay? The other extreme sort of negating any kind of higher power is making everything a matter of higher power to a degree. I mean, I got to be careful here, because obviously ultimately in the bigger scope of things it might as well be that way. But from the individual's perspective, okay, if everything that happens has a sort of a fantasticized or magical reason, yeah, seeing signs in everything. Do you guys know what I mean? Seeing signs in everything, okay? So every time I try to go on a trip, my car breaks down. Okay, now this can be a rational observation, okay, but when a person is sort of this new agey kind of externalization, how Cindy called this, can lead to people thinking that, oh, there's a magical force that is trying to hold me back from going on a trip. These things need to be investigated. Yeah, the discernment that Cindy mentioned doesn't come in until you ask, for example, well, how old is your car? Or do you drive your car often? Oh, no. Turns out this person only drives a car when she's trying to do a trip. Okay, and she doesn't maintain it. So there is, yeah, and there's a quite reasonable explanation as to why this happens. So the other extreme is where sort of normal 3D things, yeah, practical things, are being mystified. Okay, that's what Cindy, I hope I represent this correctly here, not to put words into your mouth, but this is how I understood what you said.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, cool. So let's look into what all this does. Okay, so any of these triggers that you've mentioned, physical, emotional, mental, it's psychological, social, that's all in the first three layers here. Okay, so these, all of them also contain sort of behavioral, social, and psychological components. But the spiritual and the energetic, all they do, and this is how you guys described it, they put you into a place of inner conflict, yeah, or seeking, or feeling like you have to hide, or feeling like you're like a reactive state. Yeah, and from an energetic point of view, we call this a state of disharmony. Okay, you're not in full possession, yeah, of your own controls. You can't fully regulate, you can't fully sort of depending on which level these disharmonies occur, but they kind of impede or limit your responses. Okay, they make you do things. Is that fair to say it that way? Yeah, that's why I brought up the definition here, the Webster Merriam and Google definition. So harmony is defined as a sense of agreement. It's something in a way that allows its part to see sort of in combination, in arrangement. Yes, it works together somehow. Harmony is usually identified as a human value, referring to compatibility and accord and feelings, actions, relationships. So where we feel kind of one within, where we feel okay with something, yeah, as opposed to not feeling okay, or this is not all right. It denotes a state of balance among forces influencing and even opposing one another. So this is a very mental way of saying that when we feel harmony within, we can still maintain balance, even though outer things are going on, outer things are maybe opposing or attacking me or pushing me or whatever. If I am in a state of harmony, then I can withstand that. If I am in a disharmonic state internally, then I will most likely react in ways, or be forced to react in certain ways. Here the last definition is the result of bringing what was previously in disharmony back into balance. Well, and that's ultimately the goal of all self-healing, namely, you know, to learn ways how we can do that. How can we get ourselves back into inner harmony so that we're not that reactive, so that we can actually see we have a choice, so that we have full access to our 5 senses, that we can, you know, where we can regulate our emotions, where we can clearly think, use our intellect, use our spiritual integrity, and, you know, our energetic sensitivity. That would be sort of the ultimate goal. And that's something that we typically, or in psychology, define as healthy. Okay, healthy means that we are in control. We're able to regulate and make free choices. Yeah, and choices that are based on you know, supporting us, making us feel strong, making us feel calm, as opposed to, you know, decisions that harm us or that put us into a place of disarray or put us into this reactive place. Yeah, so we're going to come to triggers here in a minute. So health, you know, from a holistic point of view, is basically the inner congruence, yeah, where when things match up internally in harmony with all aspects of life, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, and energetically. Feeling healthy means to feel balanced and whole. Okay. So just so for the, you know, like being on the same plane here. Now, what are triggers, and you know, what does science have to say about that in general? Okay, so research shows that what determines our inner state of harmony under normal, you know, conditions, or normal, yeah, not when we're triggered, but when we're not triggered, is outer conditions influence our decision making, our internal state, to 20%. Interesting, isn't it? Inner conditions also 20%. Self-awareness 60%. Now I'd like to discuss this with you. How do you feel about that when you see that? Does that apply to you? Let's look at what happens to us when we are not in an harmonic state, when we're in disharmony internally. Outer conditions can determine our state to 100%, and inner conditions as well. And self-awareness is 0. Reflect on that. What does that show you? So under normal conditions, 20, 20, 60. When triggered, 100, 100, 0. 2 times 100 obviously is not the case. It's either or a combination thereof. Can you relate to that? It's basically depicting or illustrating the problem that we've all described in the beginning. When we're triggered, our self-awareness isn't really helping us. We can't access it. We can even actually hear it in our head somehow. We can still feel it in our body. We can still have emotions about it. We can even have the energetic perception. But when we're triggered, how well can you respond to that? How good of an access do you have to your self-awareness? How self-aware are your responses? Not at all. When we are triggered, our self-awareness doesn't play a role. We are reactive. Yes, exactly. Stuff like neurotransmitters, hormones, cortisol kicks in. Yeah, something takes over. In the cortisol sense or adrenaline sense, it's our nervous system, right? Our nervous system takes over. Okay, how can this happen? we'll get to these different kinds of triggers. So there can be a physical takeover, there can be some kind of a pattern that plays out, yeah, something that I have been conditioned to, yeah, to say certain things, yeah. There can be an inner condition that does not allow you, for example, when you're cornered, yeah, when you feel very pushed in, very sort of, you know, all these things that you described earlier, okay, they can make us react, that can make us freeze, for example. Who of you here in the audience has ever experienced a freeze in your life? Yeah, my hand is up too. Those are normal human reactions. Yes, everybody, yeah. That's a normal human reaction. It's a reaction of our nervous system, either triggered by an outer trigger, by outer conditions, or by an inner condition. Inner condition is more something like trauma, like a memory, like a flashback, exactly like a trauma response. But they're usually complex. Okay, so psychology is not in full agreement there as far as the order of things, you know, whether some of these energetic triggers, for instance, can trigger inner emotions, inner conditions, and then, you know, so that they can't agree on whether that's an inner or an outer trigger. This has to do with the DSM, the manual that describes sort of how to diagnose mental disorders or illnesses, because it makes a difference if there's an inner or outer trigger. So that will probably have to be augmented soon. So what is a trigger? A trigger, just have a bunch of different definitions here, guys, is a cause, an event or situation to happen or exist. Very just, you know, down to earth, factual. Physical is something that acts like a mechanical trigger in initiating a process or reaction. Yeah, that's for example, the cortisol reaction or autonomous nervous system taking over. It's literally like somebody pulled a switch. Emotional trigger is a little more complex. An emotional trigger is anything, including memories, experiences, or events that spark an intense emotional reaction, regardless of our current mood. Emotional triggers are associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or also CPTSD, complex PTSD, yeah, where our emotions take over. Raise your hand if you've ever been emotionally triggered. I mean, it's kind of implied because you shared already what can trigger you. Yes, very much so. They are not, like I said, it's controversial whether they're all internal. I disagree with that. With emotional triggers, it's usually acknowledged that they can be triggered from the outside, but with energetic triggers that trigger emotions internally, there is a bit of debate. Yes, energetic triggers are the most complex ones. An energetic trigger is anything that can bring about an ego reaction, anything subtle, obvious, in the seen or in the unseen, anything. Okay, so I would like to offer to you this augmented view here, where you just sort of follow me along here and start assessing, you know, whether or not you got triggered by how strongly your ego, yeah, not ego in the sense of selfishness or egotistical behavior, but how strong your internal coping reacts. Yeah, so that helps to reframe our own opinion about our ego, because most of us don't like our ego. We don't like our ego reactions. But once you actually recognize that those are responses, yeah, that your ego reacts only when you get triggered, okay, and that the ego is actually there to protect you, okay, then you can go into the deeper states of empathy with yourself and recognize that the only reason why you react in this way is that something deeper, something that you are not aware of, is being triggered, and that in return then helps us to address it. So what are examples or common triggers, you guys already did a wonderful list here. Apparently, apparent things such as losses or actual trauma, or sometimes the anniversary dates thereof, frightening or unforeseen news or events. But also, you guys already referred to some of these things: overcommitting, too much to do, feeling overwhelmed, where everything that we do just becomes a chore. It's just too much. It's a constant state of stress. So this could be just called stress, actually. So nowadays accepted as an internal and external condition. We actually have a very stressful, a very complex life, okay, and therefore it's easy to get just stressed out by too much. It's just too much. Covert confrontations, family friction. You guys have responded to that already. Family patterns, things that are under the surface, they can trigger us. This is a general list of triggers. Relationship breakups, prolonged isolation or loneliness, being judged, criticized, teased, or bullied, financial problems, getting a big bill in the mail, physical illness, tiredness, lack of food, nutrients, and dehydration. Can fit that in. Open confrontation, being yelled at, big emotions, overstimulation, loud noises, or exposure to anything that makes us feel uncomfortable. People, places, items with negative memories. Unmet needs, feeling ignored, feeling unloved. And last but not least, anything related to our inner child, which usually, relates to some of these. Okay, so let's talk real quick about what happens when we're under pressure, when we're under stress, when we are cornered, when we are triggered. You guys are probably familiar with this. Our choices become very limited. It's almost binary. It's run away or fight it. Okay, for most of us, because we are kind of intellectually aware that running away or fighting things isn't always smart. Okay, we end up in this place of freeze where we can't do anything. And sometimes also there's subcategories to that, fawning, for instance, where we just let things happen, and many other complex things that can happen in this freeze state. But I think you guys can all relate to that. So when we are triggered, a certain part of our nervous system called the limbic system, the part that is tied to our autonomous nervous system, takes over. It's part of our ego. We are programmed that way per design. Okay, that when things happen that are so overwhelming, either because they're so painful or so scary or so dangerous or whatever, we don't have much time to think or to feel. We have to react, and that's why cortisol and adrenaline are the main agents there. They get excreted, and so it turns off this rational part of our brain, the more sophisticated part of our brain, the frontal cortex, and delays and puts all reactions sort of on the part of our amygdala, the more primal part of our brain, where it's mostly emotions, okay, that are dominating that part, that primal part of our brain. It's also called the animal brain of us. It's a bit, I don't find that very fitting, but it is often called that way. So just so you guys understand this, when you are under pressure, when you are triggered, okay, your intellectual and your intellectual thinking, your ability to reason, your ability to feel things out, your ability to make choices gets inhibited through your biology. Okay, and it leads, all the signals get sort of diverted to your amygdala, and that's where we find all the programmed patterns and the reactive behavior. Okay, and you can see this beautifully when there's sort of global events, things happen on a global scale, like we just did, the pandemic. How it literally turns people, intelligent people, turns them into kind of weird states where they react in ways that are very childish or very fear-based, or not that they're normal selves. Okay, this is human, guys. Nobody is free of that, and we need to understand that. Now, when it comes to continual or sort of complex ongoing stress, okay, what happens is that over time, this the amygdala part, the limbic part of our brain, starts to enlarge. It's not the muscle tissue, but it's almost like that. It becomes it's so active, okay, that it just gets bigger and bigger, and this part in us that can discern gets smaller and smaller. Now, the good news about this is we can retrain this, and guess what has shown to be most responsive, most effective, that is meditation. So 20 minutes a day for 14 days has proven to shrink the size of the amygdala and increase frontal lobe, frontal cortex activity. Yeah, that's good news, isn't it? That means it's reversible. Okay, we can handle this if we have the necessary education and awareness. Okay, now why am I showing you this here? This is a sort of a gauge for inner harmony. Yeah, we're sort of the most amygdala kind of state is the dark red here, and the most peaceful state. So there's something beyond just our frontal cortex. That's our parasympathetic nervous system, which is actually the part that lets us calm down and lets us breathe through things. Breathwork has a lot to do with that. Yeah, where we feel at peace with things, where we really go into this like total harmony with our outer environment. Okay, these are states that we don't experience very often, but those are states that we strive for. Okay, and so I think it's very important to understand what's in the way, yeah, and why it's so difficult for us. So if we are constantly triggered, if we're constantly in stress, constantly pressured, and constantly sort of get into this fight, flight, freeze, guys, okay, you can see here the world becomes threatening, okay, and we respond to the world with different coping mechanisms. Those are all coping mechanisms, and it's they're deliberate here. This is exactly in the order in which these coping mechanisms occur, which means the more conflicted you are, the more destructive anything like your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and everything becomes. All right, the denser, yeah, the manifestations of it, the more ego reactivity you have. Okay, and the more harmonic you can be within, the more you're able to maintain your inner harmony. The more self-propelled, the more growth-oriented, the more expansive your inner perception, your inner feeling, and also how you see the world. So basically, when you are in this triggered space, you are fear-based, and when you are in a harmonic space, yeah, where you feel one within yourself, not in a spiritual sense, just in a sense of that your needs are met, and you feel secure, you feel reassured, you feel loved on these fundamental levels, then you become able to balance things out yourself. This is the state that indicates when a person is actually able to self-heal, because they become able to balance things out themselves. Yeah, So you can see here this super long list of coping mechanisms that all are developed within us just to be able to deal with triggers. And you know, the further down you go the list, the more expansive, the more constructive, the healthier and more balanced your coping becomes. I would like you to comment here on this particular slide, because it's an old slide, and I don't think that this is clear to everybody really how that is sort of staggered. Are there any questions about this, or anything that you would like to add to this, or you know, just reflect on? Where do you guys find yourself? Let's do this, because this is what I do in energy coaching. I show people what they're, or have people identify sort of their most typical coping mechanism, and then teach them how to recognize basically the state of disharmony or imbalance. So it's like reverse engineering. Where do you find yourselves? If you look at these energetic resonances, these coping mechanisms, things that are dominating sort of your daily goals, your daily striving, where do you find yourself? And I can give you an example, use myself as an example here. I came from a place, a very destructive place. As a young teenager, I tried to commit suicide. I was in a very dark and very lonely place growing up with you know, physical abuse and sexual abuse and you know, alcoholic household, all these kind of things. Yeah, so not to do any projections here, but I want you to know that you know, that a person can actually change that. So I was in an extremely conflicted place as a young person, very destructive. I had a lot of physical health issues as a consequence of this. You know, also lots of emotional and mental health issues, including eating disorders, including self-harming, you know, you name it. Okay. And obviously, you know, I was basically stuck in my own trauma. I've always had very strong addictive tendencies, but because I came from an alcoholic family, I never really saw this as as a valid tool. Okay, so that kind of prevented me, miraculously, I want to add, from just repeating my parents' karma. But I did, you know, really go through several layers of coping, longing, fixating on partners, feeling completely depleted, constantly seeking, okay, until I learned what I teach, namely how to discern truth. And it helped me to feel, to form, to cultivate this inner connection that I now teach, yeah, which then sort of successively, you know, allowed me to move into places, not just experience them, but really to manifest a life in those states. Okay, so this is something that I just wanted to share, to break the ice here, because it is normal that we all sort of flip-flop, and that we can all have sort of low moments, okay, where we find ourselves there. But without us being able to even sort of see where we are on this scale, the majority of time, it's kind of hard for us, or difficult for us, to identify that we need to do something. What comes up in you? Where do you see yourself, guys? And we all copers here, so there's no need to feel bad about finding yourself in any of these places. On the contrary, I want to try to help you identify what's underneath that so that you can address it. Where do you guys find yourself majority of time, or flip-flopping between maybe? All right, so here's some chat shares. You can share directly into the microphone, guys. Yes, I was just going to say, Kirsten is sharing, I think I slide around a lot. And this is me really. When I was younger, I flip-flopped a lot. Yeah. And even if I had sort of self-awareness and identified something that I wanted to share, to change, I still sort of got pulled back into this. Yeah, Becky's sharing the same thing. Definitely seeing myself closer to conflict, physical health issues. Yeah, physical health issues is an inner guidance, guys. That's an inner signal that there's something going on. Now, if we have like say an accident and an injury, okay, that's not necessarily a physical health issue. That's an injury and that needs some time to recover. Now, if we have repeating injuries and always sort of similar, you know, then of course there might be a pattern behind that. But especially when we have those kind of issues that are sort of systemic, yeah, where it's our whole entire system involved, or sort of these modern mystery diseases, oversensitivities, allergies, you know, those kind of things are very often related to psychosomatics, meaning that there's something there that, you know, deeper beyond the physical level that is sort of causing that. Actually, I thought, yeah, I have a list here for you, very extensive list of some of these symptoms. Yeah, when we carry conflict in us for too long, then our body begins to react. Okay. Then let's look at how you know, our inner harmony is composed, right? What is it composed of? Well, you know, we have an inner state, and that's the overall state that we have. That's a sort of kind of the condition, the inner condition that we have, and triggers come in from outside and from within, and then we have something like a shield or boundaries, you know, that helps us to maintain our own inner integrity. But within our own inner state, our own inner harmony of things, we also have an ego. It's very complex. This is just sort of a visually attractive kind of way to show the complexity of it. But all these different leaves here, they are part of how we perceive ourselves, yeah, and that can influence our inner state. Okay, and we call all of this together then you know, ego. Okay, so this is how we hold ourselves together. There's no negative connotation to the word ego when we look at things from an energetic point of view, guys. It's just really showing the reactive part of us. Okay, so there's a reason why we have an ego. We need it. It's healthy to a certain degree until it's not healthy anymore. Okay, and that's the part that we need to be able to pinpoint better, because when our coping is no longer healthy, and when our coping actually produces disharmony, and then we are in trouble. Okay, because then there's a sort of a constant re-triggering within ourselves, if you will. Yeah, if our needs are constantly unmet, if we have bad habits, if you will, yeah, on whatever level, if we have unconscious projections, yeah, such as expecting others to take responsibility for decisions, or neediness, or things like that. I don't want to go deeper into this. We have lots of workshops about projections and each of these leaves, really. Trauma obviously is a big one, yeah, that we all know of, inner child as well. And these two leaves are more or less what I wanted to focus on today. And all of you know how strong the way we talk to ourselves, or not just our critical inner voice, but the totality of inner self-talk can influence our state, our inner state. So sometimes this is what therapy does, and some other EFT and NLP and so forth. They can help us to change, also coaching, mental coaching to a certain degree, our inner self-talk. And interestingly, if we change the self-talk, then the way we perceive the world and the way we respond to it also changes. Beliefs, we talked about this in conjunction with spirituality, but any kind of belief, really. I know even the belief the world is hostile, okay, can be something that influences our inner state, because it can trigger, fear, for example, anxiousness. Obviously, our emotions have a lot to do with our inner state, and also, of course, our self-image, identity, and all these things that we expect from ourselves, how we see ourselves, how other people see us. Yeah, so in energy work, we do this big distinction, and you don't have to, if you're unfamiliar with this, you don't have to understand this here. I just want you to pay attention to the blue and the red arrow. Yeah, these help us to measure energetic states and how they're being expressed. I want you to focus on what these states do. So truth is basically the facilitator of harmony, but it is not harmony yet, because as you all know, getting into a place of seeing truth and having to accept reality can sometimes be very challenging and very triggering. And this is often also why we form these more avoidant behaviors around truth. We don't want to see truth. But what that does to us is that it literally keeps us in these stressed out places. It keeps us in lower states. All right, and these states have, and we've used a few of these words here already to describe some of our subjective experience. In these states, we're very externalized. We look on the outside. We're expecting things to be resolved from the outside. We're blaming things to others. We want others to take initiative, maybe, or if we're more the assertive kind, we're doing things for others. Okay, so to a degree, the unhealed healer in us is also very externalized. Yeah, something else here can be the magical thinking, the self-loathing, self-doubting, insecurity. Those are all characteristics of lower states, of ego states. Okay, and psychologically, one of the main characteristic and pillar of staying or getting pulled into an ego state is an unmet need. Yeah, an unmet need can make us passive, can make us waiting. And the worst part about that is, see it in conjunction with what I said earlier about the amygdala and this part of our own nervous system. It reduces our awareness. It really makes us unaware. So these things often fly completely under our radar. Yes, exactly. Blaming yourself, yeah, self-loathing, self-doubting, self-blaming. Those are characteristics of an ego state. Yeah, you are caught in your lower ego reactivity at that moment. Come back here. Yeah, so ego reactivity. It can be like a form of fixation, a form of depletion, or a form of seeking. Externalization is often the result of excessive seeking. Yeah, and this can sound like, I'm not good enough, I got to do harder, I got to try more, I got to get better. That's from an energetic point of view, a seeking, and it's very externalized. Yeah, even though it sounds like it's coming from within, but it's really based on how other people see you and not how you see yourself. Higher states are different. They are, you see yourself from within yourself, and it allows you to become a little more realistic about things. It also, you still have to deal with adverse kind of, events and stuff. You can't prevent that from happening, but you feel more empowered, more active, more competent. Yeah, you feel self-motivated, self-propelled. You have more courage. Yeah, and most and foremost, you are able to be more self-aware. This is like probably the simplest way that I can offer how to differentiate between ego states and true self states, or where you are actually in a higher state. Okay, if you start looking at it that way, it can maybe help you to identify how stressed out and how triggered you actually are. Yeah. What are some of the comments that you want to make here at this point? Who of you is realizing how stressed out you actually are all the time? Okay, many of you, well, all of you are in the Sacred Self-Healing course, so you've all been introduced to antidotes, to ways to bypass this, ways to heal this, and so forth. And obviously, you already have pathways, yeah, that can help you to get out of fear, or deal with anger, or really see and work with things such as specialness, or judgmentalism, guilt and shame stuff. But quite frankly, whenever you are triggered, okay, every single time, 100%, what is being triggered is a lower state. Can we agree on that? Any of these triggers that you mentioned in the beginning, and it's subjective, obviously, so some things trigger one person more than the other person, but every single time we get triggered, that's where we're being sort of pulled into. Okay, so just so that we understand this now, I wanted to jump these educational slides here a little bit and go straight into inner child triggers. So when things trigger our trauma, okay, so we define trauma as something that happened at some point in life. It doesn't actually matter when, but they can become particularly debilitating when they happen in our childhood. Why? Because in our childhood, we simply don't have that many options. We don't have that many skills. We are powerless to a certain degree. And the younger we are, the more cutting, the more triggering it becomes. It's very important to understand. And that's why in psychology, but also in energy work, we go straight for inner child stuff, because that's 100% of people are triggered by unresolved inner child stuff. So therefore, one of the most spiritually transformative kind of things that we can, or work that we can do, is actually work with our inner child stuff, and we get to that, Heather, and the trauma in our life, because they are the most debilitating contributing factors, okay, for us not being in control of our life. What can trigger us, and this is a little deeper now than what we saw earlier is summarized as general triggers. These are more things that you guys have described, and there's a lot to say about each and every one of them. I think we agree with most of them. I mean, this here, one of my biggest pet peeves, my biggest triggers as an empath, is when I watch other people being so selfish. I can't get past that. I can't. All right, I'll be honest. That triggers me. Okay. and it makes me feel like, whoa, it's a form of disgust almost. I get very judgmental there. Yeah, or this just oblivious, ignorant behavior, but also the loudness that, just not thinking of others, that can really get to me. And it's partially linked to the unhealed healer as well. But at the same token, also when people are very aggressive, very assertive, very competitive, unspoken or unrealistic expectations, this mind reading kind of insinuation, injustice, any kind of disrespecting, degrading, or belittling, extremely triggering, especially with unresolved in our childhood. Feeling misunderstood, feeling ignored, guilt tripping, shaming, blaming, uncertainty, ambiguity, incongruency, as somebody mentioned this. So when people, and this is one of the mechanisms of gaslighting and crazy making, is when people keep you in a constant state of guessing, constant state of cognitive dissonance. This ambiguity in you triggers fear because you don't know what's coming next. So I grew up in an alcoholic family, which meant that things were this way 1 minute, and then they could turn extremely hostile or violent the next minute, and whatever could set this off, it was like a minefield, was to be avoided. So I became very, very good at walking on eggshells, which then in return also produced a lot of codependency in me, because I became so externalized, because it was not safe in my home. And so I had to constantly scan my environment. I had to scan the room. I had to scan all the people. I had to become a good mind reader. I had to become a good energy reader. But also things such as performance pressure, the fear of making mistakes, idealization, neediness, boundarylessness, and meshing. You guys know what I mean, right? This infringing behavior that other people have. Criticism, obviously, game playing, gaslighting, and then finally the obvious abuse. Heather is asking here, what are ACEs? ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and there is a whole list here. There's also a very good video that I have produced. If you go to my YouTube channel, I'm going to put this into the email with the recording for you. But this is basically the list of adverse childhood exposure experiences. It measures the trauma load a person has, and it's used in psychology, often trauma therapy, but also in criminology and forensics. Not forensics, but like trying to find out what sort of the trauma load of a person is, because the higher the trauma load, the more likely they have these triggered reactivities. And there's a lot of studies that have been done on them. They're very scary, actually, because what they found out is that people with 4 or more ACEs don't just have an abnormally high amount of trauma load, but that this trauma load also correlates with elevated risk of physical, emotional, mental, and energetic imbalances and disorders. So people with ACEs, 4 or more, they have a 40% higher incidence of heart attacks, literally 16 years less life expectancy, just through the presence of those adverse childhood exposure. And I don't want to go through them with you, but I do want to let you know that this education has helped me to understand myself. It has helped me to become more self-aware and to realize that I've added 11. I haven't been brought up by narcissistic parents or family structure, because you grew up with invisible toxic family patterns and behaviors, which makes it impossible for you to recognize it when it occurs, which means you're more susceptible to that to occur for you in your future life. I have 11 out of 10 ACEs. Sounds a bit boasty, but literally this helped me understand me and why I was so self-destructive and so lost, and why I perceived life as so dark and miserable. And when we discover something like this, it of course at first feels so sad and feels so, oh my God, But what it can help us to do is to recognize what our past has done to us. It helps us to recognize the story of our life, the narrative. And once we can recognize this sort of traumatized narrative in us, once we can pinpoint our unresolved inner child aspects, that's when we become empowered. That's when we can do something about it. That's when we can address them exactly on that level, guys. Yes, Heather, that's a thing. Actually, it's being used in psychotherapy as a measure for the trauma load in people. Strong here, general signs of energetic stress, imbalance, and lack of inner connection on an ongoing level, those psychosomatics. Those are all charts that are out there on YouTube in these explainer videos. So I'll send them to you in conjunction with, just the general signs, 20 signs of unresolved inner child aspects, unresolved trauma. Okay, so please understand that this is human, this is normal, and we all have them. So let's use these last minutes, we're already over, but let's use a few minutes here to actually start addressing them and do something about it. Okay, there's 4 stages to that. First, you're gonna have to be able to identify your inner state. Then you're gonna, and I'll explain also worksheets that you can work with. Then you have to, kind of become more aware of your trauma load, because that helps you with self-forgiveness and just empathy for yourself. Okay, and then we need to identify our triggers. And then lastly, we can develop something like a strategy for each of them. And you see, it's complex. It's 4 stages, and each of these stages requires us to really go into these different levels: physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritual, and energetically, because they all play together. Yeah, it's very complex. All right, so let's start with this first workshop here, a worksheet, just so you can do this in self-guidance. Identifying your inner state. When you work with this worksheet, I want you to look at your own physical state, your body, but not just your body, your 3D, the 3D material part of your life, the material, the physical. Okay, and then I want you to look at it from an internal and from an external perspective, all of these aspects. So internally, that would be your body, and say the state of your nutrition, the state of your health, okay, all of that that is related to that. If you have substance addictions, or if you have things that have to do with coping, if you take a lot of meds and stuff like that, and these would be things that I would put like right in between here, okay? Because those are not necessarily static things. Those are things that can be changed. So I want you to look at things internally. Okay, so this is an internal state, and then external. So an external physical state would be something like the level of financial security, the level of like your living conditions, things like this, things that surround you, that play a major role in your condition, but are not internal, they're external. And then you can reflect on your subjective experience of that. So you can do this for all these different levels of your existence, okay, to just train that part in you that does this sort of self-reflection, self-awareness, okay? And by dividing them in internal and external right from the beginning, it will help you later to recognize on what level they need to be addressed. Here, a big, and this is again something that is on my YouTube channel, where you can watch these explainer videos, but also in your Sacred Self-Healing video archive, what are unmet needs, and so forth. looks complex, but that's just sort of these infographic style, trying to bring in as much as possible. Your biological, this depicts the hierarchy of needs. So it's a pyramid, and that means that they have to be in that order. One builds on top of another. And you see here something very interesting, also in the color coding, that obviously the physical needs, and then the emotional needs, and then the needs around esteem, and how other people see you and how you see yourself, and then connection, deeper connection, aesthetics, creativity, self-actualization, and spirituality, that they all build on these met needs that are below them. And quite frankly, when Cindy, when you talked about new age externalization, the confusion that is there is that people, because they cannot deal with this or don't have their needs met here, often resort to sort of spiritual or energetic solutions. This can be a bit of a con job, a coping of our ego, because these are fundamental needs, guys, and there is nothing as a human that you can do to bypass them. Okay, so you need a place to stay, you need food, shelter, warmth, sleep, sex, protection, order, stability, boundaries, affection, relationships, family, knowledge, achievement, status. Those are all fundamental needs. We need them. Okay, it isn't here until we actually move into truth, where we are becoming aware of things such as meaning, such as true intimacy, true love, true connection. Yeah, and that's then here. Remember the gauge. Okay, this energetic stress gauge. This is applied here. Okay, so if you struggle with these fundamental needs here, if they are not met, okay, see how they relate to your coping mechanisms here. Yeah, so that's another way for you to reverse engineer things. Okay, so when you then investigate your own trauma load, and you can obviously use this by using the ACE list, but I want you more to recognize this from within. What is your narrative? What are you telling yourself? Yeah, or what's the story here? Okay, so physically, let's say you have a physical condition, and that's the narrative. What's the hardwire? What is the ego reaction that you have based on that? Okay, because I have this, I do that. That's a hardwire. Okay, and then I want you to look at what's the unmet need underneath it. Okay, what is it that I cannot meet? Yeah, based on this narrative that reproduces this ego reaction. And once you can identify the unmet need, so you can take this list here, yeah, literally go through this, or go a step further and take this list, because this list actually shows you what happens if we have an unmet need there and what that does to us. And it's very complex. And again, there's other videos that go deeper into this, because not everybody reacts to it the same way. And not everybody reacts to, their biological and physiological needs met the same way. So we can what's the English word? Put them into two groups. Yeah, so the sort of the more internalized, the more passive type of personality, and the more externalized, the more aggressive type of personality will cope differently. Okay, so while the one will go into apathy and lost belief and become sort of a total fauna in life, the other will go into revenge, maybe. When we don't feel safe and we don't feel in control, okay, one will go into neediness and greed, yeah, and the other one will go into depression and pain and sacrifice. Okay, so you can use these things to investigate your trauma load, really, by seeing how much of your reactiveness is actually based on unmet needs. And that then can help you with identifying your triggers, your true triggers. Yeah, because if you have an unmet need, okay, that does something inside of you, inside of all of us. It triggers a fear. And it triggers it on that exact level of that need. Okay. And if you can identify the fear that's underneath that, okay, and you look at your ego reaction, how you try to make up for it, how you try to counteract it. So let's say I have an abandonment issue. I was neglected as a child. Okay, my fear is that I am getting rejected, that I'm getting abandoned, that I'm not being seen, that I'm, that's my fear. Okay, what's my ego reaction? I became an extrovert. I went out. I started to talk. I started to what I'm still doing. I'm still doing this. I'm technically in my own inner child coping mechanism, yeah, of speaking up. Yeah, but I'm not doing this in a sort of ego reactive way, which would be senseless attention seeking, constantly needing, other people's attention. Anything like I learned how to balance that. It can, however, get triggered. It can get triggered in me. Okay, so I want you guys to see this, that you all have these kind of things, and this seems very complex. If you just fill out 1 or 2 of these 5 different levels of existence, you're good. Okay, you probably identified the most important one, but the only reason why we are doing this is just so that you know what certain triggers can do to you, to re-access your self-awareness, to identify the unmet need underneath it, so that you can come up with an antidote. That's why, and this is obviously showing you how much work this is. Yeah, this isn't just as easy as like, oh yeah, that's why. So to wrap this up and let you go here, and I unfortunately we don't really have that much time, and you're not very talkative today in sharing. I want to leave you off with something that I've come across in recovery work. That's the serenity prayer, to ask for serenity, to accept the things I can not change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That is what we're working on here. Yeah, and I would like to offer you an augmented version of this, to stop beating myself up for not doing things perfectly, for the courage to forgive myself and to love myself again, because I'm working on doing better, and the wisdom to know that no matter what, as long as I honor life itself, I will exist. Yeah, so that's a bit more spiritual and energetic version of the serenity prayer that can help us to get past, these immediate situations where we are triggered. Yeah. So let all this sink in, guys. Come to the Daily Sacred Self, the free daily meditations, share and find like-minded people there, because that's ultimately something that you all already know that helps. Yeah, obviously when we are in situations, be it in our relationships or workplaces, it's not that easy to remember all of this, and that's why we basically recondition ourselves, with daily meditation, with transmissions, where we can specifically address these things over and over again until we are, until we formed new neural pathways and new habits that can then inoculate us in situations, where other people trigger these things. But the best tip I can give you guys when you have a lot of triggers is to stay away from them. Stay away from people that do these things. Stay away from places that trigger that, and you stay away. First, you have to kind of allow yourself to really become able to identify things, and then work gradually on, identifying what is the unmet need. When I get triggered, the first thing and the only thing that I ask myself, and there's no such dialogue anymore, like, oh, why did I say this? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I see this earlier? No. That's all ego. That's all, lower state. The only thing I ask myself is, what is the unmet need right now? What do I need that I'm not giving myself? Even though it's something that somebody else did or said, because it is me who is responsible for putting myself into a place of balance. And then I can handle all the outer stuff better, okay? And I can tell you what it is for me that can trigger me on an ongoing daily basis. It's the lack of sleep, the lack of water, the lack of food. That's how simple that is. So the first things I do when I get triggered is I'm like, I can't respond to this right now. I need to take care of my needs first, and then I can respond to this. That's how I do this today. All right, everyone. I know it's a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming and for sharing, and you'll get the recording.